Well, good morning, everybody from Indiana. My name is Eden Forbes. I'm a PhD student at Indiana University in cognitive science, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about deriving community models with evolutionary robotics. Try to change my slide. Okay, so many of us in artificial life are interested in the relationship between simulation methods and the natural world. A common through line between both synthetic and natural mediums is the entanglement of brain-body environment systems. I personally am particularly interested in the reciprocal relationship between the behavior of agents, whether they're organisms or model agents, and their environments. To that end, I've found it productive to synthesize A-life approaches with methods in community and population ecology. Ecologists are often interested in exploring how a change in one feature of the community will affect its constituent members. Furthermore, they employ machinery and have thoroughly explored many of the consequences of interaction between organisms and their environments, organisms and other organisms, and specific traits of organisms. That said, behavior in ecology is harder to scale to the community level. Relatively less attention has been given to how specific behavioral responses to a change in environment reciprocally will affect community dynamics. There's a lot of experimental and ethological studies of how environmental changes will affect behavior, but determining the downstream impact on community structure and population dynamics is a significantly harder problem. So oftentimes in community models, behavior is abstracted to an interaction rate between two species, like you see in the blue boxes, where the presence of one species positively or negatively affects the population of another. How do we get these interaction rates? Well, determining any of these interaction rates in the wild or in the lab demands significant breadth and volume of data. Researchers generally respond to this hefty demand in one of two ways. They either try to synthesize across taxa or they really deeply interrogate one specific species. In the former case, you run into confounds of generalizability. It's difficult to draw conclusions across taxa when behavior is so idiosyncratic. On the other hand, focusing narrowly on one species also narrows the impact of any results, even if that result is more powerful. And this problem only gets bigger when we think about how plastic behavior can be. So I work on a kind of third approach for examining behavior in ecological context. My research examines questions relevant to cognitive, behavioral, and community ecologists with idealized models. And here I want to explore how we can study the possible effects of behavioral responses to ecological shifts in a toy case with implications that the method I'm going to present can fold in an arbitrary amount of biological realism and therefore yield some system-specific predictions. So to explore this, I'm going to focus on a case study of sensory pollution. Sensory pollution is the presence of human-made signals that interfere with
Eden,
naturalistic.
Eden,
Yeah,
sorry. Uh, there's some issue with the slides. I think people tell me you should stop sharing and reshare to get some
okay.
art. We have some artifacts in the slides.
Is that better?
Let's try. It looks good now.
Okay. Sorry about that. Um, so to explore this, I'm going to focus on a case study of sensory pollution, which is the presence of human-made signals that interfere with naturalistic sensing in organisms. For example, the presence of artificial light at night has been shown to disrupt circadian rhythms. Similarly, anthropogenic noise can disrupt communication between many species. And more generally, recent work has also shown that informational constraints, those primarily pollution, can be the primary driver of interspecies interactions. That said, sensory pollution impacts are realized at the level of individual organisms' perception and their ensuing behavior. So, how can we account for its impact in a community model that abstracts that behavior to a small set of interaction rates? I'm going to talk about these problems in the context of these minimal community models I work with. The minimal community model is a continuous one-dimensional world, so it's spatially explicit, but at a minimal level. The ring contains some number of producers, which are green, which serve as food sources for the consumers, which are blue, and a single predator in red, which has a home range in this ring world. Consumers and the predator can move freely in either direction on the ring, and both are equipped with various sensors I'll describe that allow them to detect other entities. I'm going to focus on analyzing the effect of the behavior and trade-off decisions of specifically the consumer's behavior that will be evolved such that its cause and effect are somewhat ambiguous as it would be in a real
Sorry.
animal.
Sorry, Eden.
One note, these agents are not supposed to represent any specific real organism. They're idealized models that let us play with principles of how we can study the relationship between behavior and ecological consequence of those behaviors. So in a little more detail,
Sorry, can you
producers
hear me?
are sessile plant-like
No?
agents. They're
Hello, hello,
initialized at
hello.
random positions throughout the environment up to a carrying capacity, and they're depleted when they're crossed by consumers. Once a producer is depleted in this manner, it is removed, and at each time step, there's a chance that new producers appear at random positions according to the equation you see on the screen.
Eden, do you hear me?
Consumers eat
He doesn't hear
producers as
me.
just described and assimilate them to their metabolic store, which is drawn upon to realize processes necessary to keep them alive and active in the environment. Am I still having issues with the slides?
You, Eden, can you hear me? No.
Okay.
Why can't you hear me?
Are the transitions not working? I cannot hear them either. No.
Anybody have an idea?
Okay. Do you want to just use the slides that I posted in the folder? How's this? Okay, good to go? Okay. So consumers have a metabolic store, which changes when they interact with producers. If it falls below a lower bound, the consumer dies. If it rises above an upper bound, the consumer gives birth to a conspecific. Embedded in each consumer is a three-node continuous time recurrent neural network, or CTRNN. That nervous system has access to four different sensors. The first three are used to detect the positions of producers, conspecifics, and the predator, respectively, and they're described by a Gaussian sensor like the one you see on the bottom. The final sensor directly reads the metabolic store of the consumer and then takes on the same range of values as that store. This allows evolved behaviors to be contingent on the current needs of an agent. The movement of a consumer is determined by a gain-scaled state difference of two of the nodes in this nervous system. And just note that as we go on, the entire population of consumers are initiated with the same evolved nervous system. Lastly, predators are hard-coded agents that move through the environment, eat consumers when they cross them, and have a specified home position. They have two sensors, one of which is the same Gaussian sensor used to detect the consumers, and the other is an inverted version of this sensor that is used to detect the home point on the circle. They move according to the equation in green, but generally this results in the pursuit of consumers when they come near, but otherwise a slow drift back to the home position. The consumers, the middle panel, are the agents whose behavior is going to be of particular interest here. And in fact, in previous work, I've described the evolution and analysis of decision-making trade-offs in these kinds of agents. That work just got published in the Proceedings for Cognitive Science. If you want to look at it. That said, for now, I'm going to set that aside and focus on the question at hand. Let's take an arbitrary solution to this task environment where the consumer has non-trivial behavior whose effect on the community is unknown. How can we determine that behavior's effect on the entire community? That is, how can we derive a community model that includes this specific evolved behavior? Furthermore, as pertains to the case study of interest, what happens if I pollute the agent's sensors and behavior changes in some unpredictable way? Having populations of simulated agents gives us a unique opportunity to measure trophic interactions. That is, if we want to know how often two species of agents are interacting as a result of some behavior, we can simply count the number of interactions that happen during a simulation. That said, interaction rates are really sensitive to the number of organisms or agents present really matters. Furthermore, we can't necessarily expect interaction rates to scale linearly with population. Fortunately, previous work has examined ways of circumnavigating this issue by sampling different demographic combinations in ABMs. By sampling various fixed demographic combinations, we can then create a data set of the interaction rate at various combinations of populations. We do this by freezing demographic processes during a simulation. So we freeze death, we freeze birth, and we let it run for a significant amount of time. And you count the interaction rate at that specific demographic combination. Then with this data, we can convert the interaction rates that result from that specific behavior into a form that can be imported into that differential equation community model. And here I'm using this generalized hill function to fit curves. Selected given its ability to approximate a lot of other functional forms, from linear to sigmoidal to logarithmic. And in this general form, we have a maximum interaction rate, a minimum interaction rate, some inflection point of the function, and the steepness of the function. And all of those parameters are available to a curve fitting algorithm. So quickly, I'm going to show what this data collection looks like in practice. Again, for the case study, we're interested in what happens if the consumer agent sensors are polluted. To pollute the sensors, I manipulated the width of the sensor and fit interaction curves for various widths. Here, I'm just going to show you the two extremes for simplicity, the sensor normal and the sensor completely obscured, and just show how the data itself can tell us something about how perception affects ecological interaction rates. First, we're looking at the relationship between producer population and the consumer producer interaction rate. Here we can see that when blinded, the blue line, that agents pretty much randomly interact with food. This is unsurprising as they are receiving no signal as to location of food in the environment. Whereas when they're equipped with their sensors properly, they're much more readily able to identify and consume producers with some diminishing returns at high numbers of producers, given that they run into an upper interaction limit due to their maximum speed. We also have to examine the relationship between consumer concentration and producer-consumer interaction rate, given that we can't assume that adding consumers scales the curve you see on the left linearly. In the blinded case, we again see a linear increase that's kind of to be expected. If you have random interactions and you add consumers randomly interacting, you expect more of a linear scaling. But in the sensor on case, we see significantly less increase in this interaction rate as consumers increase, given competition between consumers that can effectively perceive in their environment. When we take curves like this and we multiply them together, we get the final product of these interaction rates, which is these surfaces that you're seeing here. These can be directly imported into the ODE model and notably capture a physiological trait that can then be imported into these population level equations. So, for example, the graph on the left shows the sensor at its full capacity, while the graph on the right shows a significantly reduced sensor. And the color is the magnitude of the interaction rate at various combinations of producer and consumer populations. We can run a similar process for interactions between the consumers and the predators. So again, first we're looking at the relationship between the producer population and predator-consumer interaction rate. Takeaway here is pretty simple. When the consumer is blind, it is much more liable to be predated upon. And again, we want to investigate how this scales with added consumers as well. Unsurprisingly, adding more consumers yields a higher scaler in the unblinded case, given the incredibly low individual rates you see in green on the left. And once again, when we multiply these together, any pair of these equations at a given sensor width will provide the functional form of the interaction rate given the current populations of producers and consumers that can then be imported into the model. So does this method work of counting interactions, various demographics, and sort of interpolating and extrapolating across that data? The derived models provide accurate predictions for the consumer resource model without the predator. So the middle panels here you see are bifurcation diagrams across sensor width. This is the trait of the agent, not included in the actual equations that the equilibria is being tracked on. The dashed black lines on the right panels indicate a predicted equilibrium from those bifurcation diagrams at a specific sensor width, while the blue and green lines are actual population changes in a single simulation. So visually, this meets the eye test. We can see that the simulation matches the expectation of the ODE model with these imported interactions.
How about now? Okay, sorry about that. I'm gonna go back just a hair. Okay, so the model is much noisier and its predictions outright fail when compared to the ABM simulations when we introduce the predator. To some degree, this could damn the entire method I've been presenting here, but instead I'm going to wrap up by showing you how this is explainable and some possible solutions to this problem. So community models like the one derived here aren't spatially explicit. To some degree, they assume that interactions between species are uniform across the environment and that the environments are well mixed. In many circumstances, this isn't a bad assumption, and it holds in the consumer resource or the consumer producer alone case. That said, when we introduce the predator, consumers end up having this preference not to spend time in the predator's territory. Surprise, surprise. Assuming consumers stay away from the predator, we expect that random growth of producers will eventually yield a distribution like that you see here with all the producers in that predator's home range. This phenomenon is actually really well studied in real ecological systems. It's been dubbed an ecology of fear. In many ecosystems with some predator present, producers tend to flourish near where those predators actually live or travel. It's been shown theoretically that foraging reduction of prey because of increased vigilance in the presence of predators can be a stronger driver of ecosystem behavior than direct mortality. This has been also verified experimentally in the paper I have on the slide. So in this model, we run into that effect. This asymmetry results in bursts of predation as consumers are forced to enter further into the predator's territory to reach producers when they're no longer available outside that territory. And this graph on the right shows such a crash in the consumer population due to sort of overfeeding outside the predator territory, followed by this forced feeding inside of it, which leads to a lot of predation events. And in short, proper derivation of the model, of the ODE model with the predator involved has to take spatial effects such as this into account. And there's various ideas about doing this, although I will note that translating between agent-based models and ODE models is a major methodological sticking point. So there's no necessarily canonical solution to this. Addressing these issues is the first step of future work with this specific project, but more the methodology at large. And still, I believe it's a very tractable problem. And with work that the method described here can be complexified to account for more realism in either physiology of the agents, structure of the environment. For example, I've been working with 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional agents as well, or interactions between entities. Furthermore, the method's really customizable, and it can be used to study a wide variety of ecosystems and ecological conditions. And I hope that it's in application to specific biological assumptions that these methods may be most fruitful down the line. So evolutionary robotics and artificial life have historically worked on problems of ecological interest, and I believe these methods extend that tradition and offer a window into exploring how specific behaviors can affect the ecological communities in which organisms are situated.